Okay, then. So no guided meditation on this recording. Don't have to meditate today. You get the day off. You get to just listen. We meditated though, so we're ahead of you. We're the good people. Um, anyway, so um, as I mentioned, we've been going through my book, Burning Desire, and we are in the section called Higher Power of Mindfulness, and in the very last piece in here, and I looked at it this morning and was a little dismayed. Um, it's always risky going back and looking at books you wrote years ago, but it's this little section, which starts on page 35, is ostensibly about. It starts out saying it's about relationships, but then it seems to be. I think the most useful part of it is on page 36, and I'll read some of that in a minute. But about giving advice, which in the recovery world is a big theme. It's something we do a lot. We try to help each other, but sometimes we cross over into controlling or trying to tell people what to do, and so I think there's some helpful thoughts in here, but then in the middle of it, before I get to that, there's a story from my early drinking days that and I sort of want to talk a little bit about regret and shame, popular topics always. Um, because when I wrote this book, and I do this in a lot of my books. I tell personal stories, and the idea uh, is to give people. Well, I think it's so that people can kind of relate to the my addictive behavior, so that people understand that I was an addict, um, and part of it, frankly, is sort of to have an entertainment value in the book, right? Like the narrative part. I certainly like books that have stories in them, right? Um, but looking back at these stories, when they're my stories, so called, uh, it's pretty unpleasant to say the least, and particularly this story on page 35. It's a moment I still remember. So I guess I wasn't in a blackout. There were police involved. Um, and I'll say that I get asked about regret um, from time to time. It's not an uncommon question for people in recovery to ask about and to think about how to hold our past, because every one of us, of course, has a past. We wouldn't be in recovery if we didn't. And every 12-step meeting, practically every 12-step meeting has someone telling the story of their past, of their time as an addict. And one of the things that does, if you go to a lot of the meetings, is that it does help some of the shame to be removed as you start to realize that you are not uniquely flawed, but you're just flawed like a lot of other people, you know. Uh, and and indeed, just because uh, we've all admitted we're alcoholics. We're not unique in the fact that we're flawed. Every human being is flawed. Um, but well, I'll just say that once more about myself, and then I'll try to make this more generally helpful. That it is really horrifying to see that I was abusive uh, towards a woman. So I have that. And so, what to do with that? Um, my kind of way of coming to grips with that past, particularly the very dark parts of my past, is to recognize that I'm not only am I not there, but that somehow all of that, I don't know that it had to happen, but it is all part of how I arrived where I am. And so, um, as awful as it is, you know, it's something that I've learned from, and it's been, and I've not just learned about my own life, but I've learned about humans and about men, and aside from those really dark things, a lot of the failures of my life, what I'm talking, um, the things I viewed as failures, things that I strived to accomplish that I did not accomplish. Um, I also see them very much as part of arriving where I've arrived. And so, it's kind of like my advice to people who are, feeling regret about their past is to say, well, where are you now? And if this is where you are, then it, you know, maybe there was another way to get here, but this is the way you got here. And so there's nothing to be thrown out about that. It's all part of the sort of karmic unfolding, as painful as it might be. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it just was really hard for me to just ignore the words that were on the page here. Um, and as I mentioned, if I had done any of this stuff today, I would have been arrested. So, and I wasn't. So we'll move on from that. Uh, uh, so but there is a nice piece on page 36 that describes this incident where I was with my brother Jerry, one of my four brothers, and he watched my interaction with someone, and this was while I was well sober. I was already a teacher and an author, and I was going to be interviewed at this radio station, and someone just came up and started to talk to me about uh, some problem uh, in their family, and my brother was very smart and sort of observed the whole interaction, then reflected back to me what he had seen. Um, so I'll read this little section. Uh, Jerry told me what he'd noticed, that I had just listened at first, not saying anything. Then, when the woman was through, I had shared a similar experience, and only then had I given some careful advice. I'd never noticed this pattern, but I realized it was an accurate description of how I try to relate to someone who is sharing a struggle. The listening is the most important part, because if I don't listen carefully, I'll tend to make a quick judgment and fit the person into some category, as I used to do early in sobriety, giving a stock response. Instead, listening involves dropping my own thoughts and opinions for a moment and trying to fully take in what's being said to me. Besides hearing the words, I also try to feel the emotions that are being communicated. Listening to someone means trying to hear between the lines, to try to get to the motivation behind what's being said. And I will often ask people a few questions before I even start to respond. Sharing my own experience, we can call it stage 2 in this process, is a way to earn trust. When people know that you have a personal understanding of what they're going through, they're more likely to believe you. You're not just telling them your opinion. You've lived this. Giving suggestions or advice is the riskiest stage and the one that has to be done with the most care. If I'm really not sure, which isn't unusual, I will tell the person that I don't know, but that this is the best I could come up with. Oftentimes, though, after listening with mindfulness and an open heart, an intuitive response arises, not a boilerplate answer, but something that feels authentic. And when I share it, I often see that it has hit home, that I've touched the place in this person that needed to be touched. So that section was actually a response to the first paragraph of this section, where it talks about, I say, early in my sobriety, I learned a set of helpful, though generic responses to people's drinking problems. Go to meetings every day, get a sponsor, turn it over to God, write an inventory. This is some of the traditional guidance given newcomers and others, and it's a good template for recovery. But problems can't always be fixed with the stock answer. As I started to work with newcomers and sponsees, I saw how my robotic answers to their issues were sometimes a turnoff. So that's kind of what I think this section was supposed to be about, without the personal digression. And it's really one of the most important things we can learn, I think, in recovery is how to respond to other people's problems, their suffering. When is it skillful to say something? When is it skillful to just listen? Um, and it certainly kind of brings up the Buddhist teaching on right speech, where the general suggestion is to only speak the truth in a timely manner, and if it is going to be helpful. That's phrased in different ways, if it's kind, but I think helpful is the most direct way of kind of getting at what the Buddha is saying. So it has to be true, which is a challenge in and of itself, because what we think is true is just a thought. And we have to like really determine whether something is true. A lot of times we don't know. And so often when I am speaking, I will modify statements by saying, I believe, I think, I feel, it seems like, it could be, rather than saying, this is how it is. Because if I say, I think this is true, I can tell you that statement is true because I'm having that thought. So there's that. And the question of the timely manner is a really good one, right? Because first of all, and again, like really forces us back on our mindfulness. Is this really the time to say this? And we know if we have children or we're in a relationship, have a partner, really in any situation, but particularly in those those very close relationships where you know people well and you have opinions about how they should be or what they might be helpful for them, you also hopefully know when they are open to hearing things and when they aren't. And and clearly there are moments when it's just really not helpful, even though it's true. It's like, no, this isn't the time to say that. Right. So that this whole process forces us to stop and slow down, which is also really a critical piece, right? In mindful speech is like just just hold on here. And then is it useful? You know, uh, it's the if someone is asking you, uh, something trivial, but that would hurt their feelings. You know, I mean, it's the typical. Does this make me look fat? It's it's my. I guess that's. I'm not sure if that's a sexist statement, but it's uh, and like, is it useful for you to? Yeah, that really, yeah, that accentuates. No, that's like why would so. Yeah, so for someone like me who's full of opinions, and I'm guessing some of you might have opinions as well. I don't see myself as being uniquely full of opinions or uniquely full of anything. Um, it's hard to like not like let you know what I think. You need to know what I think, right? And I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking this weekend about ego, uh, and the need to be sort of recognized, and having an opinion is one of the ways to do that, and just realizing that there are times when it just isn't helpful and it's just completely unnecessary. So, this process has really helped me. I uh, I will not claim that it's something that I always succeed at doing, at being so mindful in my speech, but it really has changed the way I function in the world, and certainly as a teacher and as a sponsor, and many of us have these kind of roles, um, where people come to us and want some guidance or some uh, way of understanding something, to learn to take this reflective approach to responding, uh, really really helps. I The last time that I almost sponsored somebody was a friend of mine, and within 15 minutes of him asking me to sponsor him, I started to act like a jerk. And I realized that I had this conditioning around being a sponsor, that like, this is how you behave, tough love or some nonsense like that. And I just went, I can't do this. I'm not able to skillfully be a sponsor. I'll be your friend. I will talk to you. I will make suggestions to you. I'll do all kinds of things, but don't give me that title. It's like I am not, uh, you know, it's not a title that is safe in my hands. Uh, but it's interesting because as a teacher, I have a completely different feeling, which is one of nurturing and caring for people. And I didn't have that with, you would think you would have that with sponsees, but I got sober in 1985 when it was still the era of tough love. And I think I was abused as a newborn alcoholic. No, I wasn't. I was not. My sponsor was great. Although, yeah, anyway, just leave it at that. So, gee, seems like I opened up a few topics today. Regret. Uh, I've had a few, far too few to mention. Sorry, there's only a few there here that would appreciate that. So, Frank. Anyway, yes, I'm just going to open it up and see if anybody has any questions, any thoughts, any things I can wisely respond to.
Jonathan has his hand up.
What'd you say?
Jonathan has
Oh,
his hand up.
thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Jonathan, hi.
Hi. Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, I actually just right on the topic kind of like right speech. I'm trying to like decide how much is relevant to given it, but I guess like I got like really emotionally close with a member of my home group, as one does, and then there was some conflict, and now we're just like not speaking anymore. And so like typically in my home group, this is kind of like where I would go to share about things of this nature.
Yeah.
And so like my question is like according like how do I practice right speech, right? Like, cause like I like there's almost like no way I can share about what I need to share about without this person knowing it's about them. So like, is it just like too bad I can't share about it there? Or like, I know when I check my intentions, of course, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're answering the question for yourself.
Hmm.
I mean, I guess my thought is find another place that's safe, because otherwise you'll be like talking in some kind of vague generalities that won't be meaningful for anybody who's listening, and they won't really satisfy you. It won't feel like you've taken care of your own need to share.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, yeah, there's just like a piece of me that like, it's like the wanting. I'm like, no, this is my space. I want this. I want to be able to do this here. Right.
Right.
I think I think that's it. That's really the simple answer.
Sometimes we lose things,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You have to find a replacement for them. Deborah, hello. You're muted.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
I meet once a week with two women who we work your workbook. And it's interesting because when I approached these women, one of them said, I can't do the sponsor title. And interestingly enough, even though they both came up through AA and I have a hard time with AA, so henceforth I'm here. But it's interesting because they do approach guiding me in two very different manners. The woman who resisted the sponsor label is very, very tough love. It's like, okay, you're going to hear this and then we'll deal with your feelings later. And the other one's much more touchy-feely, gentle, and it's really interesting, sometimes challenging, to have both of them in a mentor role. So I just thought I'd share that. That's it.
Yeah, it sounds challenging. In fact, it sounds like, a double bind.
Mhm, mm.
I mean, what do you do with that?
Well, basically, I listen to them both and take whatever feels right in my heart, mind,
Mhm.
at the moment, and then I get to reflect on it, and say, "Oh, I see what she meant, but the message was maybe too harsh,
Mhm.
or maybe too soft."
Yeah.
And so it's nice that we have a whole week in between, and we do see each other the next day in a sangha, but I mean, the people in my sangha know that we meet, but we never really, I mean, it's quote unquote confidential in our world. So yeah, it's I like it. But it is challenging, and occasionally I just meet with one of them because someone's out of town or something.
Mhm.
So that's a little easier because I know exactly how that's probably gonna go. So I don't have like, I can be curious, but I don't necessarily have expectations. Make sense? Yeah.
And now I'm like I'm getting curious, like, are you like the three of you working collaboratively, or is it like the two of them, are you both your sponsor, sort of both
Um,
sponsoring you?
no, they've both worked the steps a couple times, but in an AA world.
Uh,
And so we're all working the steps in your workbook.
I see, yeah.
And so
It's just that
that's
sometimes they then have something to say to you. It's not like that.
right.
Yeah.
Like on the fourth step, they really were like, no, you got to get to that fifth column,
Yeah.
and I'm like, Kevin doesn't say anything about the fifth column,
Yeah,
you know.
I didn't
So
write any columns.
I know exactly. So that 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 sets the parameters there that
Yeah.
we're using your workbook, not traditions or
Yeah.
yeah. So
Well,
yeah,
hmm.
it's good for all.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
Interesting. Thanks.
Mhm.
Let's see, Flippy has his hand up there.
Hi there. I just wanted to say that one is I appreciate the idea of listening, and I just lost a friend that passed on, and it's important for me to be heard when I share my feelings, and timeliness. I was talking to my brother, and he said something along the lines of people's stories will be forgotten, and I don't think it was the right time to bring that up.
Right.
So and the other thing I wanted to bring up was I am celebrating 14 years clean this week, and I wanted to thank you for your books, because they meant a lot to me in my early recovery, but also in later recovery. And seeing you in person when I had 9 years was a wonderful treat too. So, and I'm really appreciative of you for doing this for so long during the pandemic. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, the old, the doctor who tells you, oh, you've got 6 months to live, but everything's impermanent, so not really helpful. Definitely the timeliness. It's true. Yeah, I think I kind of want to circle back, since there isn't another hand up right now, to this tendency to react or respond to people with, as I described in the beginning of that section, sort of robotic or just automatic replies, sort of the checklist of things that you're taught to do. And it's a tricky thing, you know. I think early in recovery, early in sobriety, especially, I mean, if somebody's an addict or an alcoholic, it is kind of good for them to get very clear advice that's not personal. It's just like, this is what people need to do when they get, you know, you need to do these things. But when we ignore who people are and their own, you know, preferences and needs, and just try to shove something down their throat that we think is right, we can do as much damage as good. And that's where I think it's really important to pay attention. Because sometimes people need to hear something pretty tough. You know, sometimes people really need tough love, you know, to be told, like, I think you're really an alcoholic, like, or you're, you know, you're killing yourself, just at a certain point, right? And I don't think it's helpful to have that be the auto reply, you know, to someone. But when you see that it's really happening and that they're not hearing any of the gentler advice, to really be willing to even risk a relationship, um, to tell somebody the truth, I think is a courageous and necessary thing at times. But boy, it really takes a lot of care and attention. You have to really be sure, right, that that this is really the only thing to do. I'm often enough anyway, I've been asked for help by parents of addicts, and you know, they're hoping that I'm gonna tell them how to take care of their child. You know, this is what you should do to, and if you do this, they'll get clean or they'll get sober. And the first thing I have to tell them is that, to a great extent, you just don't have any power in this situation, you know? And in fact, your efforts to help are often harming your child. And that's a really, really tough thing to say to people. But there just isn't really another answer I can give. You know, I mean, I only say that after I've done some probing, like, you know, how long has this been going on? Have they been to treatment? You know, what are they asking for help? You know, when people say to me, oh, my, like they'll want me to help their child, but the child isn't asking for help. You know, and when I say child, I'm usually talking about an adult child. But you know, I'm like, well, are they asking for help? You know, do they want to talk to me? You know, I'm happy to talk to them, but you know, I can't, if they, you know, if they aren't interested, you can't make them be interested. That, you know, and in that regard, actually, I was just reading this recently, and something that I've believed to be the case, which is that the one form of help that seems to be somewhat effective for people who are in denial, to help people to come out of denial is the motivational interviewing, in which, and I've never done it, I haven't been trained in it, but it's something like talking to someone and kind of leading them to see for themselves what it is that they really want and what would be required to get that if they really want it. And so you're not saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do this. You're saying, well, what is it that you want? Well, I want to have this. Well, what do you think you would have to do? Well, I'd have to go back to school and get a degree. Well, how would you do that? And eventually it comes down to, I guess I'd have to stop drinking, I'd have to stop shooting heroin, if I wanted that. And then you're like, well, do you want it? Or what do you want more? And that I think that's a question we've all had to ask ourselves at a certain point. What do I want more in my life? Do I want to be loaded more than I want to have other things like, a life, a job, a relationship? And sometimes people really do want to be loaded more than they want anything else. And there's not much else to be said about it. So we're officially out of time. I'm noticing a couple questions. Any chance the above is a hybrid retreat? Oh, is that about Southern Dharma? So meaning, is it going to be online as well? No, it will not be online. I'm sorry. We've done some online retreats and we've done some live retreats, but we haven't tried to combine the two. It's kind of hard to. I mean, I guess I guess you just put a computer in front of the teacher, and you have your hybrid retreat. Well, think about it. If time goes on, if I should say, if this sort of situation goes on, is this a CBT approach? Are you talking about mindful or motivational interviewing? I don't know. Maybe Michelle is shaking her head. Michelle knows something about this. Do you want to say something about it, Michelle?
Yeah, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy,
Right.
and that's a different kind of treatment than motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is probably closer to a type of therapy called solution focused, because you're really kind of meeting the person where they are and helping them to come up with their own discrepancy, which is what Kevin was talking about, kind of like, what are you looking for and what could get in the way of that? But yeah.
Okay.
That's
you for
great.
that, Michelle.
If there's anything else, Michelle, you wanted to say to on top of what the things I said, because obviously I'm not as knowledgeable about this.
You can Zoom motivational interview or Google or what is
Yeah,
that? What is
Google,
that?
yeah.
Not Google. What is that?
YouTube?
YouTube.
Yeah.
And you can see motivational interviewing in action.
Great. Thank you. That's a lot of help. So very nice to see everyone. Oh, Mary Helen, you've got your hand up. Are we going to see you next week?
Well, yes, you are.
Okay.
I don't know whether there's really time for this, but one of the things that you read that I underlined that I really appreciated was that when you're listening to someone with an open heart and mindfulness, there often is an intuitive response that arises. And I think we've all, or at least I have, I've had that happen once I got sober and practiced this kind of listening. And I sometimes was just amazed at where this intuition was coming from and how often really appropriate and meaningful it was to the other person. And it was one of the things that made me think, okay, this is my higher power coming in, sort of suppressing my own ego and my own story and saying, here's what you need to share. And so I've underlined that, and I really appreciated that as part of this reading. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Mary Helen. I obviously agree with what you're saying, and yeah, you have to come to trust your own intuition, because sometimes things come up that are not like, you know, in the book, right? They're like, oh, should I be saying this? This seems right, you know, and yeah, it's really, it definitely fits into that, you know, Buddhist version of a higher power, and it also is what it says in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in step 11, when it says we'll come to, you know, I don't remember what it says, but it says we'll come to trust this intuition, right? That
Intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us.
that's what I meant. Yes, someday my memory will be completely gone and I won't know anything, but I still remember that there are things that I used to remember. So that's something. Yes, and so there it is, right? That's exactly what they're saying. It's, you know, that we sort of like things come up, but as it also says in there, you know, you might make some silly mistakes, because before you really know the difference, and essentially it's coming to know the difference between your ego and your intuition. And you know, your ego wants to be like, I know everything, I'm really intuitive. And oops, yeah, watch out. So it certainly takes a lot of care, but I do think that sort of willingness and coming to things with love and caring, and listening to your own mind and listening to your own words, and then as well as listening to the other, is a good protection, you know, in those circumstances. All right, that's a great thing to close with. And so, yeah, those I don't see on Friday night. Some of you I will see next week on retreat. And be well. Don't drink or use, no matter what. And stay mindful.